our argument to the court today is that frankly, the legislators just lost perspective and created a regime that doesn't work. Because if a member of the public can argue and raise a reasonable prospect of serious harm exists, and that's not enough to stop a wind turbine project, then something's wrong. And that's the legal reality.
If you're going to hire a lawyer to fight a big cause, that guy should be on your Rolodex. That's Julian Falconer. He's one of the toughest lawyers in this country, and he gets results. And the Ontario government is now going up against them because they spent billions of dollars subsidizing all these, windmills, and they can't seem to put up enough fast enough. So they're forcing them down everyone's throats. Now an Ontario appeal court has to decide if, in fact, what they're doing, specifically the turbines, is violating the constitutional rights of those that are forced to live near them. Let's bring in Rebecca Thompson and Jeremy Richler to go head-to-head on this topic. And I pity you, Jeremy, because Rebecca knows almost everything there is to know about this topic. And so I'll be interested to hear your perspective, but nonetheless, this is the first of its kind constitutional challenge, I think, for these turbines. Yeah. And it's kind of like a David and Goliath fight.
Yesterday was day one. It's a 3-day appeal. I was there yesterday and listening to Julian Falconer all day long lay out his case. And it was extremely riveting because you had a packed room, probably close to 100 people, mostly farmers, who have been fighting this for 5 or 6 years. And what Julian Falconer explained is that the Ontario government has created what he calls an express lane for wind turbine companies, in which case they get to launch projects with the support of the government, and there is zero recourse for any farmer or Ontario landowner to try to fight this. The Ontario government claims, look, we did set up a recourse. It's called the Environmental Review Tribunal. A farmer or a landowner who is concerned about this project can move forward. However, of all of the 50 tribunals that have happened in this province over the past few years, nobody has won. And Julian Falconer has said, look, there are known unknowns about the health effects of wind turbines in this province, and the Ontario government recognizes that. They have recognized that they do not know all of the health effects of wind turbines, and yet they're putting the burden of proof on the farmer or the landowner to prove that the turbine is going to cause them harm.
My question to you then, Jeremy, is did the Ontario government, I mean, this is something that they want to build their legacy on. The Green Energy Act is something that they've spent billions on. I mean, this is their baby. Is this going to come back to haunt them?
I don't think so. I mean, the thing is, what I find very interesting here is, we've often heard from conservatives, I think with some justification, that they don't, who often aren't crazy about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms because they see it as a mechanism whereby the courts make policy. And, Stephen Harper has always believed, with some justification, that the court's role is to enforce the laws and not make the laws. And what I find interesting here, albeit, and I will admit that this is imperfect legislation, is you now have many forces on the right who essentially want to do that. They want to use the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to make policies and to strike down laws from a government that they don't like. And I think that this definitely, the fact that it's going to the court is an embarrassment for the government. It's showing some very serious flaws with this legislation. And that on its own, I think, is a win for these landowners.
Because Falconer would not have taken his case on. But do I think they will win in the court? No. I think that's because they would have to show on a balance of probabilities that this law infringes Section 7 of the Charter of Life, Liberty, and Security of the Person. And courts are generally loath to interfere with decisions made by the legislature. So I don't want to bet on it, but my hunch would be that this will not succeed.
Well, one of his main arguments, or I'll mention two of his main arguments, is that there's no balance of power, that the Ontario government has essentially set up a process whereby the individual or the landowner or the farmer does not have the ability to identify any recourse in trying to prove his or her case. And so the Ontario government has not allowed this balance of power. Secondly, he says that the landowner, there's no due process. So in fact, what he called it was a process of abuse, whereby the landowner has, when he or she is permitted to move forward and argue his or her case, that it's an abuse of power because the ERT, which is the tribunal, essentially moves forward at a rapid speed and doesn't give the landowner sufficient time to actually present a case.
There are billions of dollars on the line here. There are a lot of people making a lot of money. The faster they can get these things built, it's kind of like build it now, we'll deal with the fallout later. I mean, we could be, theoretically, in 20 years, if all these people start coming forward and they've been driven crazy by these things, or it is revealed that there's some kind of health effect, we could be on the hook for billions in class action lawsuits.
But yeah, I guess my point is that this is, to me, a case in point in why I think conservatives should be a little bit friendlier and bigger fans of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because even though
it's kind of a blanket statement.
Because what I'm saying is, even though I don't think this will
rights.
succeed, you now have, I mean, you know, you have a lawyer representing farm owners, and you know, ostensibly, many people favoring this, decisions by the government that they determine to be unconstitutional. And the Charter is the mechanism that says that governments can't just make laws on a whim, that they have to respect some fundamental principles that are enshrined in law. Now, again, do I think that this case will meet the test? No, I do not. But the fact that it's even being brought up and being mentioned in the media and introduced as it is, the government is going to have to react. But I do believe, as somebody that very much supports the Charter, that it should not, that the court should never be making policy, and the law has to be, it's not enough to say that there's a possible link to health. They would have to establish on a balance of probabilities that there are adverse health consequences, and unless they can do so, it's not.
This is not an issue having to do with conservatives versus the liberals. What's shameful is that the liberals have set up a legislative regime with regulations that do not allow landowners and farmers to argue their case. And these are farmers and landowners who are moving away from their homes. And not just one or two of them, there are hundreds of them who are moving away from their homes because these turbines are being set up within 550 meters away. And there are significant...
But I'm not saying any of that's right. What I'm saying is you now have conservatives ostensibly
it's not a
supporting...
conservative versus liberal issue. This is... I don't think half these farmers are probably conservative.
Show, I mean, that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms should transcend ideology, and you now have forces on the right kind of cheering on a lawyer who's taking on a government they despise.
Not once
I don't think you'll find. Look, what bugs me the most about this issue is that it's the little guy versus the big, huge government, and they've designed it that way.
Well, then isn't it wonderful we have a charter that tries to uphold the rights of the little guy?
Yeah,
you guys often don't like that.
Well, you guys, I mean, you're making blanket statements about you guys. I mean, to each his own. I know the law, and I follow it. I like it to be the way it's presented, but the bottom line is, as long as you've got governments shoving things through with no checks and balances and with a lot of gray area, and you stack it against the little guy. I mean, these people are going broke in the process of fighting.
Well, that's why Pierre Elliott Trudeau believed in a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that said that government's power isn't absolute. So look, I'm not saying like Pierre Elliott Trudeau now.
Jeremy, the Bill of Rights introduced by Diefenbaker would have also been used in this case. So even if the Charter did not exist, there would still be an opportunity for Julian Falconer to go to the Bill of Rights introduced by Diefenbaker to be made.
But I think what we all agree on, is that, I think what we all agree on is that the fact that there is legislation that puts reasonable limits on a government is something that we can all support, so let's agree to that.
I don't know. I mean, look, I don't know. I get the sense that the Liberals have made sure that this thing was going to get rammed through, rammed down people's throats, and to hell with the ramifications long term. You know what? It's us versus you. And when you're a farmer who's making 40 grand a year, how do you fight that? I mean, how do you fight that? It's not a conservative issue for me. It's a little guy issue for me. And quite frankly, I think it's easy for those who live in big cities to sit back and say, well, boo-hoo to you, because I don't have one of these things over my head. And if I did, I would take a chainsaw out and cut it down somehow. I mean, literally, it's not something that I have to worry about. But if you're outside of Toronto, they're a nightmare. Is that it?
They are, absolutely. Alex, 100% agree with you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I've never seen Rebecca get so feisty with you, Jeremy. Look what you did to her. All right, we're going to leave it there.